I generally make it a policy not to check out games that are still in public beta or early access. Yes, there are numerous benefits to a developer choosing to do something like this, in that it allows them to not only receive more funds for the game while they're still developing it, but also gives them access to players who are basically acting as casual beta testers for their products, allowing them to find and isolate big problems with the game and fix them well before the game actually launches. But as many positives as there are plenty of negatives too, as early access is easily exploitable by hack developers who prefer to use the pretext of an unfinished game as a means to exploit money from gullible players, not realizing that the game will never be finished. I realize that these instances are usually easy to spot, but my own personal view on it has less to do with worrying that my money will be wasted, and more with the fact that I just prefer to start playing a game when it's complete. But every now and then you come across an exception. Credit for making me aware of this game goes to expert YouTube pundit and someone who could go semi-pro in the ASMR Vocal Championships, Sid Alpha. If you all have a moment, you should check out his channel, he does great work. Anyway, he happened to be playing a game I was totally unfamiliar with, but instantly caught my attention when he was apparently using magic to shift islands in the sky around. This was accompanied by a message stating, "This game is Driftland. It doesn't suck." Well, my curiosity was piqued, and so I decided to look into it. Despite its status as being in early access and in a genre that I generally don't play a lot, that of the real-time strategy game, the look of the game and its premise was enough to get me to plonk down the money to play it. And I'll happily say that this game is worth looking into. Does still need some work, but pretty fun as it is now. The world of Driftlands takes place on a planet that has been torn asunder due to the irresponsible use of magic in the distant past, and the only way that the people of this world were able to save themselves was to cast a massive spell that tethered the broken floating islands to the world below it, stopping them from floating off into space. For hundreds of years afterwards, magic in general completely disappeared from the world. You play as a nameless mage born with the ability to cast magic, and as such are gifted dominion over a large island, the first of many, and are tasked with building your empire and trying to bring the shattered lands together again. Under your rule, of course. Sounds like a pretty interesting setup, all things considered, but at this point, setup is really all you have. Aside from the backstory and the old man who acts as your tutorial instructor, you don't get any recurring characters, you don't get any missions, and you don't really have anyone else to interact with, so really the game as it stands is primarily just a sandbox at present. That is a letdown, but I am curious to see if there will be more lore introduced as the game's development continues. Gameplay will be instantly familiar to anyone who has played any basic real-time strategy game. If you've at least fiddled around with games like Stronghold or Age of Empires, most of the standard tropes apply here, though on a slightly smaller scale. You have your castle, which you can upgrade when you have all the necessary materials, and in general, upgrading your castle is pretty damn important because it increases the amount of units you can have and the amount of gold you naturally generate. But beyond that, you have the standard tropes of buildings you can make, homes to attract more peasants, farms to feed those peasants, garrisons to create combat units, mines and lumber yards to gather more material, and so on and so forth. But this game starts to set itself apart in its setting and how that affects the gameplay. The world is made up of several islands, vastly separated from each other, and you can only see so far from your castle. So how do you expand your empire? You grab hold of those islands in your magical grasp and you yank them closer to your home island, where you can then build a bridge to them and start exploring. You do also have abilities that let you check out an island before you decide to drag it closer, such as the Farsight spell that lets you see into the dense fog around you, and the Portal spell that lets you create a temporary portal from an island you have dominion over to another one. But in order to efficiently explore an island and start harvesting the materials therein, you have to drag the island close enough to build a bridge for easy access. Of course, you also bring over anything that's on that island, so you might find yourself being attacked by barbarians or giant eagles and ravens that call that particular island home. But combat is a bit more involved than just clicking on a unit and then commanding them to attack an enemy. Instead, in addition to all of your island moving, teleporting, and terraforming, you also have a set of spells specifically made to help you fight off invaders or invade them in turn, such as freezing showers of icicles or the tried and true fireball.
Fireball! Fireball! And... Fireball.
In addition, you even have a healing spell, allowing you to directly heal units under your command. Now, pardon my ignorance, as I said, this isn't really a genre that I have a huge amount of experience with, but from the few that I've played and seen generally, you as the leader of armies and the toppler of empires don't usually take any direct action in combat, instead ordering others to do it for you. This mechanic, on the other hand, really makes you, as the player, feel like you have a lot more direct control over the way the fights and the well-being of your troops plays out. You can also find stores of treasure on the islands that you take over, as well as capture wild nests for creatures like ravens and dragons, and then use them to summon flying troops of your own once you have the proper material to create them. But that's the other big thing about this game, you're pretty limited when it comes to the materials at your disposal. See, every island that you take over has a finite amount of resources. You have the basic stuff like wood and stone, but you can also find more rare materials for various buildings and actions. Gold to pay your workers and fighters, rubies to summon creatures to fight for you, iron and diamonds and coal for specific buildings, and mana, which you need for casting spells. However, like I said, every island has finite resources, and some islands might not even have a certain type of material at all. And once those materials are gone, that's it. You can cast an expensive terraforming spell in the hopes of getting an island to produce the materials that you need, but other than that, when an island runs dry, that's it, no more of that material. This is made all the more stinging when you realize that any building that was dedicated to harvesting a certain material on an island will flat out be abandoned when there's nothing left for it to harvest, taking up space on that island totally useless until you destroy it. And of course, you don't get any materials back that you use to build it after you destroy it. So you find yourself in a position of having to very carefully balance how you harvest your materials, and it's not always guaranteed that you'll be able to find another island that has exactly what you need. And it's very easy to overextend yourself and end up in a position where you just can't find what you need, or just aren't producing enough food or gold to keep all of your peasants fed or your workers paid. I eventually got to a point that, while I wasn't actively losing, I didn't really have a way to push forward and feel like I was moving on. Harvesting materials became very slow as I couldn't afford to put more than one peasant to work in the buildings I made. And what I did manage to harvest, I needed to immediately turn around and spend on general upkeep, and while I could inch my way forward, I just didn't have the patience to keep going, and within a few hours, I felt like I'd seen most of what the game had to offer, at least from its current state and what I played. I want to stress that I do think the gameplay is fun, but it does feel like the game could use a bit more balancing. Or maybe I'm just not playing the game the right way. That's what the internet likes to say about people, right? Yeah, probably. In terms of looks, the game has some nice personality. The floating islands look lush, and in most cases they're detailed enough that you can tell just by glancing at an island what it has for materials and treasure, at least on its surface. Your units are easily discernible and recognizable, though not particularly detailed, and a lot of the buildings you can create can sort of blend together. Once you've played for a while, they do start to gain a bit more distinction, especially ones that have to be placed in areas like the very edge of an island, but when you first start building them, it can be difficult to recognize them on sight. The islands themselves have a decent amount of variety to their looks as well. Forests, deserts, quarries, you'll find enough of a change between them that your empire won't get boring to look at. However, assets and looks are limited, and so even the airborne enemies that you encounter do start to look boring after a while. The same can be said for the game's sound design, which does still sound a little bit generic and placeholder-like. Nothing that you're going to remember, and it really doesn't do much to give the game its own identity. In an auditory sense, the game bores me a little bit. Not bad, but like I said, really placeholder. Again, it should be stressed, these things could change down the line as the game's development continues, and with the state it's in now, it's still fun to play around in. In fact, the only reason I'm not more into it in its current state has more to do with the type of games I like to play. I'm not an achievement hunter, and I'm not the sort of person who likes to play through a game just for the sake of playing it. I like having missions to do, I like having end goals, I like having a campaign. It's one of the reasons why I personally don't find games like SimCity or The Sims as engaging as others. Simply building for building's sake isn't something that keeps my attention for long. But for the time I've spent with this game, its setting and its more unique mechanics, like gathering the islands and being able to directly participate in combat, definitely makes me feel like this is a game worth keeping an eye on. As it stands now, it's going to depend specifically on what sort of game you're looking for, whether or not you find its $20 price tag worth it. For someone like me who wanted to satiate my curiosity, yeah, I do feel like it was worth the price of admission and I got a good afternoon's playtime out of it. And I'm eager to see where it's going. I'd recommend this to anyone who enjoys RTS games with fantasy or low-tech settings as it is now. It can only go up from here as development continues. For everyone else, well, I'd recommend doing your research before you make that decision, as $20 for an incomplete game in a genre you're unsure of is a little high. Or you could always just wait a while longer until the game finishes up development. I don't see myself going back to the game much until it's closer to completion myself, but it has really gotten me interested, which is more than I can say for a lot of other early access games on both sides of the quality spectrum. And I really wish that projects like this were the rule rather than the exception. Congratulations, Driftland, you've got my attention, and I'm really hoping you manage to keep it. Check it out, folks. I think it's worth a quick look at the very least. I'll see you all next time.